The Arizona Territory in 1882 was a place of high, clear, unforgiving light. The sun did not just warm, it scoured. It bleached the sky to a pale, dusty white by midday and baked the red earth into plates of cracked ceramic. It was a land that demanded everything and promised only space. Out here, miles from the noise and whiskey-soaked diplomacy of Red Mesa Crossing, Jonah Calder lived in that space. He was a man past 30, built with the wide shoulders of a laborer but whittled thin by solitude and a diet of jerky, beans, and memory. He moved with the land's rhythm, which was slow and deliberate, marked by the slight drag of his left foot, a permanent, aching souvenir from a panicked horse and a bad fall years prior. The limp was a part of him now, like the silence he wore as a second skin. His days were a rotation of necessities. He choused his small herd of longhorns, their ribs prominent in the dry season, their tempers as frayed as the heat. He replaced sections of fence, the new wood stark against the sun-grayed posts. He avoided the town. He had no use for the saloon with its booming laughter and boasts that shattered the quiet. He had even less use for the long, assessing stares of the townsfolk, the women who pitied him and the men who measured him. Jonah's world was his small, solid ranch house, built of timber he had cut and hauled himself. But the house was not a home. It was a museum of a life that had ended before it began. He kept the past locked away, mostly, but hints of it remained, stubborn as the alkali dust that crept under the door. On a peg behind that door, untouched by any hand but the wind when he left it ajar, hung a woman's faded calico scarf. It had lost her scent of lavender and soap, smelling now only of pine wood and thyme. In a small wooden box atop his dresser, nestled in dried cotton, was a simple gold band. He never wore it. His work was too rough. But some nights, he would pick it up, the metal warm from the day's residual heat, and hold it until the edges bit into his palm. And from his window, if he looked past the water trough and the struggling patch of corn, he could see them two low mounds of earth, marked by simple wooden crosses. His wife, Mary, and the child they never got to name, taken together by a fever that first winter. A winter that had frozen the ground too hard to dig for 3 days. That loss had hollowed him out, leaving behind a man who was quiet, careful, and fundamentally disconnected from the pulse of the world. He was a good neighbor in that he caused no trouble, but a poor one in that he offered no company. One afternoon, the heat was a physical weight, the air still and shimmering. Jonah was tracking a stray steer near the edge of his property, where the flat scrubland broke away into a deep, rocky canyon. The steer was gone, but something else had been caught. A wild mare, paint-splotched and beautiful, was terribly tangled in a strand of barbed wire. It was new wire, sharp and vicious, left by some neighbor claiming a new line. The mare had fought it, twisting herself deeper into the metal thorns. She was bleeding, lathered in terrified sweat, and dangerously close to the canyon's sheer drop. Another man might have seen the waste of time, or the danger. Another man might have ended her suffering with a bullet. Jonah dropped his reins and approached slowly, his hands open and visible. He made no sudden moves. He began to talk, his voice rusty from disuse but low and calm, a rumble that vibrated with the earth. "Easy now," he murmured, the words seeming to dissipate instantly in the vast emptiness. "Easy, girl. I am not the one that did this. I am here to help." The mare's eyes rolled, white and frantic. She kicked, the wire slicing deeper into her hock. Jonah did not flinch. He kept talking. He sat on the hot ground, just outside her kicking range, for nearly an hour, letting the sound of his voice be the only thing in her world besides the pain. He spoke of the weather, of the creek, of nothing at all. Slowly, agonizingly. The mare's panicked breaths began to slow. Her trembling eased, replaced by an exhausted shiver. Only then did he move, inching forward on his belly. Like a snake, he pulled a pair of heavy wire cutters from his saddlebag. "This will sting," he whispered. He worked with a surgeon's patience. Each snip of the wire was a risk, a potential explosion of hoof and muscle, but he was gentle, his movements economical. His eyes locked with hers. He absorbed her fear with his calm. When the last strand fell away, he meticulously unwrapped the barbs from her legs, his hands becoming slick with her blood and his own. He led her back toward his modest barn, the mare leaning on him, trusting his damaged gait. As he crested the rise, he paused to rest his own aching leg. He scanned the perimeter, a habit, far off, silhouetted against the sinking sun on a high red mesa. A figure sat on horseback. It was too distant to make out features, but the shape was wrong for a cowboy. It was lean, still as a totem, a cascade of black hair, braided, leather and beads that caught the last light. It was an Apache woman. She was not hiding. She was watching. Jonah stared, his hand on the mare's warm neck. He felt a strange, cold prickle run down his spine, a feeling entirely separate from the heat. He squinted, raising a hand to shield his eyes. When he lowered it, the ridge was empty. The rock was bare. She was gone, as if the sun had simply burned her away. That night, sleep would not come. The mare was safe in his corral, her wounds cleaned and dressed with salve. But the silence of the cabin felt different. It felt observed. Jonah sat on his porch, the chair creaking under his weight. He listened to the chirr of the crickets and the dry, whispering sigh of the wind as it passed through the wooden bones of the house. He had felt the presence of death for 3 years. This was new. He felt seen. The watcher on the ridge had not felt threatening. It felt analytical, as if he were a piece of livestock being assessed, or a line of text being read. He felt judged, not by a god, but by a mortal, and it unsettled him more than any threat of violence could. He rose before the sun, as always. The rhythms of the ranch were the only religion he had left. He made coffee, his boots scraping on the plank floor, and went out to water the cattle. The air was cool for now, the sky a deep, bruised purple in the east. He was near the creek, hauling a heavy wooden bucket, his shoulders straining, when a shadow detached itself from the deep shade of the cottonwood trees. He stopped. It was the woman from the ridge. She was perhaps near 30, though it was hard to tell. Her face was strong, with a high forehead and a wide mouth that was set, but not unkind. Her eyes were dark, deep, and utterly direct. She stood with a straightness that seemed to underscore replace with end underscore replace of underscore replace, the underscore replace land underscore replace. She underscore replace was underscore replace, dressed underscore replace in underscore replace, simple underscore replace, sturdy underscore replace, leathers underscore replace, and underscore replace. She underscore replace held underscore replace, no underscore replace, visible underscore replace, weapon. She did not wait for him to speak. Her voice was clear, low, and carried no trace of the subservience or anger he expected from her people when encountering a white man. Leah, she said. It was an introduction. Daughter of Ishkene, a medicine woman. He knew the name. Jonah gave a stiff, awkward nod. He was holding the bucket, the weight pulling on his arms. He suddenly felt large, clumsy, and very white. Leah's eyes moved over him. It was the same analytical gaze from the ridge, but closer now, and more intense. Her gaze lingered on the puckered white scar on his forearm, where a rope had burned him to the bone. She noted the way he shifted his weight onto his good leg, and the way his eyes refused to meet hers, focusing instead on the ground just to her left. She had seen him free the horse. She had watched him that night on the porch. She had, it seemed, made her assessment. She took one step closer, close enough that he could smell the faint, clean scent of sage and dust on her. She looked directly into his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. The world, the sound of the waking birds, the gurgle of the creek, the whisper of the wind, all of it fell away. "I want a child from you," Leah said. The silence that followed was absolute. Jonah stood frozen, his mind a complete blank. The words were English, but they made no sense. They were stones dropped into a perfectly still pond. The heavy bucket slipped from his nerveless fingers. It hit the dirt with a dull thud, water splashing cold over his boots and soaking the leg of his jeans. He did not feel it. what he managed to choke out. His voice was a dry croak. He looked wildly around, as if expecting to find someone laughing, to find the hidden punchline. "Ma'am, I do not understand." He thought it was a trap, a cruel joke. Perhaps she was addled by the heat, or sent by men in the saloon to mock the lonely widower. But Leah did not move. Her expression did not change. She was not mocking, and she was not mad. She was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. She did not blush. She did not look away. She did not repeat herself. She simply stood, as if she had just thrown a spear that had pinned his soul to the cottonwood tree behind him. Jonah's heart began to hammer against his ribs. A frantic bird in a small cage. This was not a joke. His hand, moving on its own accord, drawn by years of territorial instinct, drifted down. His fingers found the worn wooden grip of the Colt revolver holstered on his hip. It was a movement of pure, ingrained reflex. He saw her eyes flick down to his hand, and then back to his face. She showed no fear. His fingers tightened on the grip, and then, just as quickly, they went limp. He let his hand fall away. Empty. He was looking at her, really looking at her. She was not here to rob him. She held no gun. She was not here to beg. Her pride was a tangible thing. She was here to demand. Jonah Calder, who had walled himself off from the world, who had buried his heart on a cold winter day, realized the woman standing before him was not asking for his cattle, his money, or his life. She was asking for something far more frightening. She was asking for a future. Leah left the stunned white man by the creek, the image of his face a mask of confusion, fear, and something buried even deeper etched in her mind. She did not run. She moved like the land itself, quiet and deliberate, melting back into the landscape that had birthed her people. Her journey was not long, but it was hidden. She followed the dry arroyo, her moccasins leaving almost no trace on the packed earth, until she reached a narrow split in the rock. This was Ghost Cedar Valley. It was less a valley and more a deep wound in the earth, a place the cavalry patrols missed because it was inconvenient. The camp was a mixture of eras, a portrait of survival. Old hide tipis, their skins darkened by smoke and time, stood beside crude log cabins built from scavenged timber. The air smelled of juniper smoke, drying meat, and the faint, unsettling odor of sickness. This was not the home of her childhood. It was a refuge, and it was shrinking. She walked past children who were too quiet, their bellies slightly swollen, their eyes too large. She nodded to the few women who were scraping a single, stringy hide. The men were ghosts, either dead on some forgotten battlefield or lost to the white man's whiskey in reservation towns. She went to the largest cabin, which served as the council lodge. Inside, the air was thick. Her uncle, Chief Dashi, sat by the low fire. He was an old man, his face a map of deep canyons, but his back was still straight, his eyes still holding the hard glitter of a hawk. "You went," he said. It was not a question. His voice was like gravel rolling downhill. "I went." Leah sat across from him, tucking her legs beneath her. She did not lower her gaze. "The council has met," Dashi continued. Ignoring her defiance, he stared into the flames. "The agent at San Carlos gives us 2 moons. After that, we must be on the barren lands, or the soldiers will come for us." Leah knew what the barren lands meant. It was a reservation where the water was poison, the ground grew only stones, and the rations were flour filled with weevils. It was a slow death. "The children are weak," Dashi said, his voice tightening. "The cough takes them in the night. We have no rifles. We have no strength. The old ways are failing." "Girl, the spirits have forgotten us. The spirits have not forgotten us," Leah said, her voice sharp. "We have forgotten how to listen to them. We listen only to our fear. Fear is a wise teacher when the wolf is at the door." He finally looked at her. "And the wolf is Koha." Leah's entire body went rigid. Koha, the name was a sickness. He was the strongest of the remaining warriors, a man who moved with the brutal grace of a mountain cat, all muscle and rage. He had gathered the few angry, dispossessed young men and held them with promises of violence. "The council has made a choice," Dashi said. the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Koha will be our war chief. He has made an arrangement. He will bring us guns. He will bring us food. He will ally with the white cattle baron, Jeb Burke." Burke Leia felt a cold sickness rise in her throat. Burke was a name whispered in fear. A man who collected land the way Koha collected scalps. Burke wants the land, all of it. He will pay Koha to be his hound, to hunt those who resist, to hunt other Apache, if need be. In return, we are allowed to live. For now. He paused, the silence stretching, heavy and suffocating. "There is one condition, for this alliance to be sealed in blood. He demands you. You will be his wife." Leia stood so fast she knocked over a small basket of drying herbs. "No." The word was flat. "Absolute. It is not a request," Dashi roared, rising to his full height. "It is the survival of our people. You are one woman. We are many. You will do this. You will give him sons, and you will secure our future." What future? Leia's voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, pure rage. "A future as slaves to a man like Burke. A future as dogs eating scraps from a white man's table. You ask me to lie with a beast." She stepped into the firelight, her shadow leaping up the wooden walls. "I remember Koha. I was a child, at the stream gathering, when he and his raiders burned the Willow Creek people. I saw him. He was not fighting. Uncle, he was laughing. He laughed while he watched the women and children burn in their lodges." Her voice dropped, becoming intensely personal, digging into a wound only they shared. "And I remember my mother, the healer, the gentle hand. You say this is survival. The council said the same when they gave her to that brute, Kale. They said it would forge an alliance. I watched her die for 2 years. I watched her spirit break, piece by piece, until she was just a shell. She died because she was given as a treaty. I will not be your treaty. I will not be my mother." Daskji's anger broke, replaced by the weary, infinite sadness of a man who had already lost too much. He sat down heavily. "Then what is your way?" "Girl magic prayers. The white man's world." You see no other path. Leia thought of the man at the creek, the way his hands, stained with her blood, had been gentle on the horse, the way his eyes held a pain she recognized. "There is another way," she said softly. "Koha offers a child born of hate, allied with our enemies, a child who will learn to hunt his own people. I will find another path, a child born of both worlds, but not of violence, a child born of choice, a child who can walk between the worlds, not be crushed by them." It was an echo of her plan, a hint. She would not tell him about Jonah. Not yet. Dashki looked at her, his eyes searching her face, seeing the iron will he had helped forge. He saw her mother in her eyes, and it broke his resolve. He felt the world shifting beneath his feet, the foundations of his authority cracking. "You speak in riddles," he grumbled, turning away. "You have always been too much like your father. Stubborn, a dreamer." He made a decision. It was a gamble, and perhaps his last. 7 days. The new moon. That is what I will give you. 7 days to find your other path. If you have not returned by then, if you do not come to Koha's fire as is intended, you are no longer one of us. You will be outcast, a traitor, and we will all pay the price for your pride, miles away, in the dusty, lamp-lit haze of Red Mesa Crossing. A different alliance was being sealed, in the back of the livery stable, the air thick with the smell of horse manure, hay, and cheap whiskey. Jeb Burke met with Koha. Burke was a large man, soft in the middle but with a brutal, square jaw. He wore a waistcoat, stained with gravy, and his eyes were small, piggy, and missed nothing. He was a creature of appetites for food, for land, for power. Koha stood in the shadows, his arms crossed. He was the opposite of Burke, all sinew and bone and coiled energy. He despised the white man, but he recognized his power. "You did good work on that South Pasture fire," Burke said, biting the end off a cigar. "Had the whole town convinced it was a random Apache raid? They were foolish." Koha grunted, "They are always foolish." Burke lit the cigar, the flame illuminating his smug face. Now, to our future. The railroad is coming. They need a clean line, right through that worthless patch of dirt owned by that sad sack widower. Calder, he pointed a thick finger at a hand-drawn map on a barrelhead. We need him gone, and we need this whole valley. He made a sweeping gesture. Swept clean. The army is tired of it. The politicians want it done. They just need a reason. You want me to kill the widower? Koha said, No, no. Burke chuckled. A wet, unpleasant sound. Not you. That is messy. We are going to make him the reason. We are going to blame him, and your people. For all of it. We will burn his barn, kill his cattle, and leave a few Apache arrows lying around. We will say he was trading with you, turned on you, and you retaliated. The town is already jumpy. They will lynch him. Then the army will come in to clean up the Apache threat. And he tapped his chest, will buy the land cheap from the county. And you, my friend, will get your rifles, your whiskey, and that pretty little medicine woman you're so sweet on. Koha said nothing. His face was a mask of stone. He did not like being called a friend by this soft white man, but he wanted the guns, and he wanted Leia. As they spoke, one of Burke's men, a thin, rat-faced cowboy named Clyde, slunk into the stable. He had been riding patrol near Calder's land. Boss, Clyde whispered, his eyes wide. You ain't gonna believe this. I was watching that Calder place, like you said. Just at dawn, I seen her. Seen who Burke snapped, impatient, an Indian, a woman, coming right out of his damn house. Clear as day. She cut for the hills like a deer, but I seen her. Calder, he is keeping an Indian in his house. Jeb Burke's small eyes lit up. A slow, malevolent smile spread across his face, staining it with triumph. He looked at Koha, whose expression had suddenly turned murderous. Well, Burke purred. Blowing a thick cloud of smoke, it seems our plan just got a whole lot easier, and a whole lot more personal for you. Koha Leia did not return to the camp, not yet. She could not bear the weight of their hopeful, desperate eyes. She could not bear the thought of Koha's triumphant gaze. She climbed to the highest V-shaped notch in the canyon wall, a place where the wind always blew and she could see her entire fractured world. To the north, in the deepening shadows, was Ghost Cedar Valley, the smoke from her people's fires a fragile prayer in the twilight. To the south, miles across the scrubland, she could see a single, tiny point of yellow light, Jonah Calder's ranch. It was a foolish choice, a desperate throw of the dice. He was a white man, a man from a people who had taken everything. He was quiet, he was sad, and he had been kind to a wounded animal. It was all she had. She reached into the small leather pouch that had been her mother's. She did not know what she was looking for. A sign, strength, an answer. Her fingers closed around the smooth, cool stone her mother had always held while praying. Leia closed her eyes, the wind whipping her long black hair across her face. If she did not choose, they would choose for her. Dashi would choose. Koha would choose. Burke would choose. They would hand her over. A piece of property, a treaty of flesh. It would be her mother's death, all over again. She opened her eyes and stared at the distant yellow light. No, she whispered to the wind. I will choose. The dust of the high desert was a constant companion, but that day it came with malice. A dry, hot wind from the east had been blowing since noon, peeling the grit from the flats and hurling it into the sky, turning the sun into a tarnished copper coin. Jonah was reinforcing a hinge on his corral gate when he saw them. 3 riders materializing from the red haze. They were not drifting. They were riding with purpose. And that purpose was his ranch. He set his hammer down, his body tensing. He knew the riders. He knew the heavy, confident slump of the man in the lead. Jeb Burke, flanked by his brothers, Owen and Clyde. Jeb was the patriarch, a man whose presence seemed to suck the air from a room. Owen was the muscle, broad and dull as a fence post. And Clyde, thin and nervous, was the weasel. They fanned out as they approached. A practiced gesture of intimidation, their hands conspicuously loose near their holsters. Calder, Jeb Burke called out, his voice a false, booming courtesy. He reined in his horse but did not dismount, forcing Jonah to look up at him. Just paying a neighborly call, checking on your welfare. I am fine. Burke, Jonah said. His voice was flat. He did not invite them to water their horses. Clyde, the weasel, was already dismounting, his eyes darting around. He pointed a skinny, dirty finger toward the creek bed, his voice a high whine. Right there, Jeb, just like I said. Moccasin tracks, clear as day. Jeb Burke's smile, which had been thin, vanished. He fixed his small, dark eyes on Jonah. Company. Calder. We heard you were a solitary man, but Clyde here, he says he saw tracks. Says he saw the shadow of a woman up on the trail this morning. An Apache woman. The accusation hung in the air, heavier and more toxic than the dust. Jonah's first instinct was to deny it, but he was a terrible liar. His silence, the hard set of his jaw, was all the answer they needed. He looked past Burke, at the horizon. My land is my own. Who I have on it is my business. Is that so? Jeb's voice turned oily and dangerous. You see, that is where you are wrong. What you do on your land affects all of us. The good, God-fearing folk of Red Mesa Crossing do not take kindly to men who shelter savages, especially not after the fire at the Miller place, especially not with women and children to protect. Jonah's hand twitched, but he kept it off his gun. I had nothing to do with that fire, and you know it. I know you are quiet. Calder, Owen rumbled, speaking for the first time. Too quiet. And now, Jeb said, leaning forward in his saddle, it seems we know why. You are an Indian lover. The word was spat like venom. It was the lowest, most damning accusation one could make. It was a brand, and it would stick. I am telling you, Burke, Jonah said, his voice dropping low. You have worn out your welcome. Get off my land. Or what? Jeb chuckled. He unhooked the leather strap from his pistol's hammer. You will make me. The world compressed to the 20 yards of dusty ground between them. The wind howled, a high-pitched keen, as if sensing the blood that was about to be shed. Jonah knew he was a dead man. He could maybe take one of them, but not all three. That is enough. Jeb! The voice came from a new rider, who had approached unnoticed from the east road. Marshal Reed Calloway sat his horse, a tall, exhausted-looking man, whose face was worn into a permanent expression of weary disappointment. His clothes were clean, his badge dull, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm. Stay out of this. Reed, Jeb snapped, his authority challenged. This is settler business. This is my business, Calloway said, his voice never rising. And right now, you're on Calder's property, threatening him. I call that trespassing. I call that intimidation. I do not call it neighborly. He is hiding an Apache squaw. Clyde shrieked. I seen her. I seen the tracks. Calloway looked at Clyde, then at Jonah. His gaze was hard to read. It was the gaze of a man who believed in the law, even when he did not much like the people it protected. You saw tracks? Clyde, you got this woman. You got any proof, other than your own fevered imagination? Calloway's eyes shifted back to Jeb. You got a warrant. Jeb, you got a right to search this man's property. Jeb Burke stared at the marshal, his face purpling with rage. He was a man of the gun, not the law, and he hated being reminded of the difference. He had the power, but Calloway had the authority. It was a fragile balance, but for today, it held. You are making a mistake, Marshal, Jeb said, his voice soft and full of menace. I make a lot of them, Calloway replied, unmoved. Now, unless you have got a legal complaint, I suggest you and your brothers ride out. The wind is bad today. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then Jeb Burke laughed. A short, ugly bark. He gathered his reins. Have it your way, Marshal. But this ain't over. The town will hear about this. They will hear how their marshal protects a man who would bring heathen murderers to our doorstep. They will hear how Jonah Calder has chosen his side. He turned his horse, so sharp it kicked up a cloud of dust. Owen and Clyde followed. like dogs at their master's heel. Jonah watched them go, his shoulders rigid, until they were just shapes in the haze. He was still standing there when Marshal Calloway rode up next to him. "You are a fool." "Jonah," Calloway said, not unkindly. "They had no right. They have got the numbers, and they have got the hate. That is more than a right. These days, if you are harboring someone, you had best send them on their way. Burke will not stop. The next time, I might not be close enough to stop him, and the town they will listen to him." Calloway tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Jonah alone in the screaming wind. He stood there for a long time, the hammer cold in his hand. He looked at his small house, his barn, his few cattle. It had been a sanctuary of grief. Now it was a target, with a single rumor, a single shadow on a trail. Jeb Burke had transformed him from the poor veteran widower into the traitor. He was an outcast. Night fell, but it brought no peace. The wind died, leaving a thick, suffocating silence. He skipped supper. He was in the barn, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows. He was brushing the rescued mare. The rhythmic scrape of the curry comb the only sound. Her wounds were healing. She was starting to trust him. He was running his hand along her warm flank when a shadow moved by the door. He did not startle. He had been expecting her. Leah stepped into the barn. The space felt suddenly small, charged. The air was heavy with the scent of dry hay, horse sweat, axle grease, and the faint, clean sage smell he now associated with her. She looked at him, her dark eyes taking in his exhaustion, the new lines of tension around his mouth. He looked at her, the source of his new trouble, the woman who had demanded the impossible. "You should not be here," he said, his voice a low growl. "They were here, the Burkes. They are looking for you." "I know," Leah said. She did not seem afraid. "They are always looking. They will be back. They will kill you, and they will kill me for hiding you." "I know." Her calm infuriated him. "Is that all you can say? You came here. You said those words to me. You have put a noose around my neck. For what?" A crazy idea. Child Leah was silent for a moment. She walked past him, deeper into the barn, and ran her hand over the smooth, worn wood of a stall. "I came to tell you a story," she said, her back to him. "Not the one you are ready to hear. Another one." She turned, her face half in shadow. 3 winters ago. My people were in a high camp, near the Saltbone Ridge. It was a hard winter. The snow was deep. We were starving. Jonah stopped brushing the horse. He was listening. One night, they came. White men, not soldiers. Their faces were covered. They came in the dark, and they set fire to our lodges. They shot anyone who ran. She spoke without emotion, as if reading from a report. They did not take scalps. They did not take women. They were not interested in that. They burned our winter stores, our dried meat, our blankets, everything. They left us to freeze or starve. "I am sorry," Jonah said, the words sounding hollow and useless. "They left one thing," Leah continued, her voice hardening. "Flour. Dozens of sacks. We thought it was a mistake. We thought they had missed it in the raid. The sacks were marked, the brand of the Burke Ranch." Jonah felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. "We thought it was a miracle, a gift from the spirits. Until we ate it." Leah's voice dropped to a whisper. "The flour was bad. It was gray, with mold, but we were so hungry. The children ate first, then the elders." She looked up, her eyes burning into his. "They did not die from the cold. They died from their bellies. A fire in the gut, a fever that boiled the mind. My sister's child, my mother's brother, they died. It was not a raid. White man, it was an extermination, a quiet one." Jonah's hand, holding the curry comb, was shaking. He set it down. 3 winters ago." The words echoed in his skull, dislodging a memory he kept buried under mountains of grief. 3 winters ago. Mary. That was the winter he had been low on funds. The winter he had bought a cut-rate wagon load of flour from a trader affiliated with Burke. He had been proud of the bargain, but the flour had been off. A strange smell. A grayish tint, but it was all they had. He remembered Mary's fever, her delirium, the agonizing cramps that made her scream. He had held her hand, cooling her forehead with snowmelt, praying to a God who was not listening, while the life he had built rotted from the inside out. He had always blamed himself, his poverty, his poor judgment. He had blamed the harshness of the land. Leia's words changed everything. The two stories, separate and terrible, now twisted together into a single, monstrous shape. His wife's death, the destruction of Leia's camp. It was not fate. It was not bad luck. It was Jeb Burke, a man who would poison Apaches to clear the land and sell the same tainted stock to a poor settler to turn a profit. The same greed, the same soulless, casual evil. Jonah's grief, a vast, stagnant ocean of guilt, suddenly found a channel. It began to move, to churn, and to focus into something new. It was a cold, sharp, righteous rage. He turned away from Leia, bracing his hands against a wooden post. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. He did not realize he was crying, hot, silent tears of fury, until he felt a hand on his arm. He flinched. It was Leia. She was not looking at his face. She was looking at his hand, the one clenched so tightly around the post his knuckles were white. Her fingers, calloused and warm, gently brushed his. Then her hand moved. She placed her palm over the puckered white scar on his forearm. The rope burn, a mark of his own past, his own pain. It was not a gesture of pity. It was not a gesture of seduction. It was a gesture of acknowledgement. I see your scars. You see mine. He did not pull away. The contact was an anchor in the storm of his rage. It was the first human touch he had not recoiled from in 3 years. He finally looked at her. Really looked at her. She was not just a strange woman with an impossible demand. She was a survivor. She was, in this one terrible way, his kin. He straightened up, wiping his face on his sleeve. You should not be here, he said again. But this time, the meaning was different. It was not a dismissal. It was a warning. It is not safe for you. It is not safe for me. He needed to think. He needed to understand. He needed to hear the rest. Not just the story of Burke, but the story of why. Why him? Why a child? I need to hear all of it, he said, his voice rough. But not here. Not now. Burke's men will be watching this place. He thought of a place he went when the grief was too much, a place the world had forgotten. There is a canyon, west of here. Coyote Narrows. There are hot springs. It is neutral ground. No one goes there. He looked at her, his eyes still raw with his newfound, terrible clarity. Meet me there, at dawn, 2 days from now. Tell me everything. Tell me why you said what you said. Jonah arrived an hour before he said he would. His hands slick with a nervous sweat he refused to acknowledge. He felt foolish, restless. He had spent the last 2 days in a haze. The ranch chores happening by rote while his mind replayed two separate, conflicting images: his wife's face, pale with fever, and Leia's face, steady and unblinking in the barn. He tethered his horse in a dense thicket of juniper well back from the canyon's edge and approached on foot. His bad leg ached, the uneven rock making his limp more pronounced. Coyote Narrows was a place few people knew, a deep gash in the earth where the high desert rock split open. Down below, hidden from the world, steam rose in soft, white plumes. The air was already thick with the mineral smell of sulfur and wet stone. Jonah stood at the rim, feeling exposed. He felt like a 16-year-old boy, clumsy and large and impossibly out of his element. He was a man who understood cattle, drought, and the finality of a spade striking hard winter ground. He did not understand this. He did not understand the woman who had single-handedly torn down the quiet, empty defenses he had spent 3 years building. The sun was just beginning to touch the opposite rim, painting the rock in shades of blood and gold. When she appeared, she came from the east, walking into the sun. She was not a silhouette on a ridge this time. She was flesh and blood. She was leading her horse, a wiry paint, and as she descended the narrow switchback trail into the canyon, Jonah saw that she was soaked. The hem of her hide dress was dark with water, and her long black hair, usually in a single, neat braid, was undone. hanging in heavy, damp ropes. She must have crossed the deep part of the creek to avoid the main trail. The sight of her not as a mysterious watcher, but as a tired woman with wet hair flustered him more than any threat could have. He had prepared for a confrontation, for an argument. He was not prepared for this quiet vulnerability. She reached the canyon floor and secured her horse, letting it drink from the stream that ran out of the hot springs. She turned and looked at him. Jonah cleared his throat, his voice emerging as a dry rasp. "You came. You asked me to," she said. They stood apart, the steam from the pools rising between them like a curtain. The canyon was a world unto itself. The only sounds were the high, lonely cry of a hawk and the constant, soft bubble of the springs. The water, dark and still in the low light, reflected the sky, turning the clouds into patches of gold on the surface. Leia sat on a flat, warm rock near the largest pool. She did not invite him to join her, but she waited. Jonah sat, not on the same rock, but on one nearby. He felt the need to fill the silence. "The story you told, about Burke, about the flower. It was the truth." She said, "I know." He swallowed, the confession tearing at him. "My wife, Mary, it was the same winter, the same sickness. I bought that flower from him. I thought I was saving money." Leia's eyes closed for just a second. She had not known that part. "Then you know," she said softly. "I know Burke is a monster," Jonah said, his voice hard. "But I do not know you. I do not know why you came to me. Why you said what you said. It is madness." Leia looked at him, her gaze as steady and assessing as it had been on the ridge. "It is not madness. It is the only thing that makes sense. I have watched you." Jonah called her. "For many months." Jonah looked up, startled. "Watched me, I have seen you. You are not like them." She gestured vaguely, toward the town, toward the world of men like Burke. "Last spring," she continued, her voice low and even, "a calf died. It was stillborn. You were out with the herd. The other ranchers would have left it for the buzzards, or dragged it to the canyon edge and thrown it over. I watched you. You dug a hole in the hard ground. It took you an hour. You wrapped the calf in a piece of burlap, and you buried it." Jonah said nothing. He remembered that day, the ache in his back, the uselessness of the act. "I saw you by the creek. In the summer," she went on. "A she-wolf. She had pups hidden in the rocks. You had your rifle. Your hand was on the trigger. I saw you let the rifle down. You let her go. You lost 2 steers that season, but you let her go." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "And I have seen you at the 2 graves. You sit, you do not cry, you just talk. You talk to the stones. You talk to your wife. You talk to the child who is buried with her." She leaned forward, her intensity pulling him in. "Do you understand Koha is strong? The men in your town are loud, but they are brittle. They break, they burn. You are a man who buries the dead. You are a man who honors loss, and you show mercy when there is no profit in it." This was her reason. It was so much more complex, so much more painful than he could have imagined. "Koha wants a son to be his arrow," she said, her voice tight with a sudden, fierce passion. "A weapon to aim at the white world. Burke wants a world with no Apache in it. I want a life. I want a new seed. One that is raised by a man who understands that life is sacred. One who understands both grief and kindness." She looked directly at him. "I do not want a child born only of Apache anger, or only of white greed. I want a child who can stand between the worlds, a child born of choice, not of violence. That is why I chose you." The air thrummed with the weight of her confession. Jonah was overwhelmed. He stood up, his bad legs scraping on the rock. He walked to the edge of the steaming pool, his back to her. "You are asking me to—" He could not say it. "You ask me to betray my wife. Your wife is dead," Leia said, not cruelly, but as a fact. "She is," he wheeled on her, his voice breaking with a pain he had held in for 3 years. "She is, and you ask me to bring another woman into my life, into the house where I held her hand while she burned with fever, into the home where I prayed for a child that never came." He was shaking, the confession of his own deepest fear tearing out of him. "I'm afraid. I look at you, and I am terrified. It is not you. It is the thought of feeling anything again. It feels like a betrayal. I do not think I deserve it. I do not think I am allowed. The admission hung in the steaming air. His weakness, his guilt. Leia stood, her movements fluid and silent. She did not approach him, but moved to the edge of the pool. The ground was warm. She bent and slipped off her worn moccasins, then eased her feet into the steaming water. She sighed, the tension leaving her shoulders. After a long moment, Jonah, exhausted by his own outburst, limped over and sat on the rock beside her. He unlaced his heavy boots. The simple act felt momentous. He slid his own feet into the water. The heat was a shock, but a good one, seeping into his bones, untying knots he did not know he had. They sat in silence for a long time, the shared warmth of the water a silent truce. Leia's outer cloak was damp and heavy. She undid the leather tie at her throat and let the cloak slide from her shoulders. It fell behind her on the rock. Underneath, she wore a simple, sleeveless dress of soft hide. Her shoulders and arms were bare, dark copper in the canyon light, and strong. Jonah saw a thin, white line running from her collarbone down toward her arm. It was a knife scar, old and clean. He had seen many scars on men, scars of brawls, of accidents, of war. They were marks of ugliness or foolishness. On her, it just seemed part of her. She saw him looking. "Kale's men," she said, her voice devoid of self-pity. One of the children cried, "I was in the way." Jonah was mesmerized by her calm acceptance of the history written on her body. He had spent 3 years hiding his own internal scars. She wore hers openly. She turned to him, the steam rising around them, blurring their edges, making them the only two people in the world. She reached out. Her fingers were calloused, warm from the water. She took his hand, the one with the puckered, white rope-burn scar on the wrist. He did not pull away. She held his hand, palm up, for a second. Then, slowly, deliberately, she guided it. She did not look at his face, but at his hand. She pressed his open palm flat against her own body, on her left side, just over her heart. Jonah's world stopped. He could feel it, under his palm, through the thin hide. He could feel the beat. It was not the frantic fluttering of a trapped bird. It was a strong, steady, powerful rhythm. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. The beat of a running horse, of a hawk riding the wind. The beat of a life that had refused, again and again, to be extinguished. He could feel the warmth of her skin. He could smell the sage and the steam. His own breathing had stopped. His heart was hammering a frantic, broken rhythm against his own ribs. She finally looked up, raising her chin. Her eyes, dark and deep, held his. They were inches apart. The steam beaded on her forehead, on her upper lip. He saw, for the first time, a flicker of something in her eyes that was not strength, not assessment. It was fear, a fear that matched his own. She leaned in, just a fraction. He leaned in, his body moving without his permission. His lips parted. The crack of a Winchester rifle shattered the canyon's peace. The sound echoed, magnified by the rock walls, like a bolt of thunder. They sprang apart as if scalded, scrambling to their feet. Jonah's hand flew to the gun he was not wearing. Leia's hand went to the knife at her belt. High above them, lining the canyon rim they had just walked, were figures. 5 of them, on horseback. They were dark silhouettes against the bright morning sun. One man stood forward, his horse stomping impatiently at the edge. He was all muscle and coiled rage, his bare chest crisscrossed with war paint. He was holding a spear, not a rifle. Koha. He had found them. He had seen it all. He had seen the hands, the steam, the near kiss. His voice boomed, the canyon walls throwing the words down at them. He shouted first in Apache, a string of guttural accusations. Leia flinched, her face hardening into a mask. Then Koha switched to the rough, broken English he used for trading and threats, ensuring Jonah understood every word. He pointed the spear, not at Leia, but directly at Jonah. "She is mine," he roared. "The new moon. She will be at my fire, or I will take this weak white cowhand and I will peel the skin from his bones. You will die, white man, for touching what is mine. The air in Coyote Narrows, moments before a haven, was now a trap. The steam from the springs was a spectral mist, clinging to the figures on the rim. Koha's threat, a raw-throated roar of possession, echoed and died, leaving a terrible, ringing silence. More figures appeared on the rim, older men, their faces grim. Jonah recognized Chief Dashi among them. He had not come for a raid. He had come for a judgment. Koha, in his rage, had forced the hand of the council. Koha himself was already scrambling down the switchback trail, his movements fluid and certain as a predator's. He landed on the canyon floor with a jolt, his warriors fanning out behind him, cutting off the narrow exit. Leia moved to stand in front of Jonah, a gesture of protection that only seemed to fuel Koha's fury. He strode forward, his naked chest gleaming with sweat. The muscles in his arms and shoulders nodded. He was the physical embodiment of the land's violence. He ignored Leia, his black eyes fixed on Jonah with a burning, bottomless contempt. "You," Koha spat, jabbing a finger at him. "You think you are a man?" He pulled a long, heavy-bladed knife from the sheath on his hip. The blade was dark, stained. "You will fight me, now. With these, for her." He threw a second, identical knife into the dirt at Jonah's feet. It landed with a soft, heavy thunk, the handle quivering. This was not a fight. It was an execution. Jonah looked at the knife, then at the man. Koha was built for this. He lived for this. Jonah was a rancher. He was thin, and he was damaged. His left leg, his anchor, was a map of old pain. He would be dead before his second breath. Leia's voice was sharp. "Koha, no, this is not our way. He is not a warrior. He is a thief," Koha roared. "He touches what is mine, and he will die for it. Or you will see he is a coward. Choose, white man. Pick it up, or I will cut you down where you stand." Jonah's mind raced, faster than it had in years. He could not fight, he could not run, and he could not, be butchered like a pig in front of her. He needed a different currency. His gaze flickered from Koha's brawn to Dashki's weary eyes, which were watching him from the rock above. "You are right," Jonah said, his voice surprisingly clear. He did not look at the knife. He looked at Koha. "I am not a warrior. I am a rancher. A fight with knives would prove nothing, except that you are stronger." "I am stronger," Koha sneered. "But is that the only strength?" Jonah asked, his voice rising, projecting to the elders on the rim. "Is a man's worth only in his arm? You want to prove you are the better man to be a father." He forced the word out, the word Leia had used. He turned his gaze to Chief Dashi. "Chief, your warrior wants to kill me, but this is not a war. This is a test of life. I propose a different challenge." Dashki raised a hand, silencing Koha's angry protest. "Speak, white man." Jonah pointed up, toward the high, treacherous rim they had just seen. "I am a man of the land. I read it. I survive on it. So does he. Let that be the test, not a knife, a trial, of who the land favors." He thought fast, his eyes scanning the terrain. "There is a dead pinon tree on the high mesa, the one struck by lightning. We both know it, the first man to reach it, but we do not use the trail. We go straight up, through the scree, over the high saddle, a test of the mind, the breath, and the will, not just the muscle." A few of the warriors murmured. This was a challenge they understood. It was a test of endurance, of skill. Koha laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You are weak, you are crippled. You will fall and break your neck before the first ridge. Then you will win," Jonah said simply, shrugging, "and you will have your proof, and I will be gone." Koha looked to Dashki, his eyes begging for permission to kill. But Dashki had seen the logic. This was a clean way out. It was a fair challenge. A death by combat on Dashi's authority would cause a war with the town. A death by accident on the mountain that was the land's will. "The challenge is set," Dashi said, his voice final. "From this spot, to the lightning tree, the first man's hand to touch the burned wood. "Go, now!" Koha did not wait. He gave Jonah a shove that sent him stumbling backwards, his bad leg twisting. Before Jonah had even regained his balance, Koha was already moving, hitting the base of the canyon wall and beginning to climb. His movements powerful, leaping from rock to rock like a goat. Leah rushed to Jonah's side. "Jonah, you cannot! Your leg, I cannot fight him," Jonah said, his teeth gritted in pain. "But I can walk. Go, get out of the canyon. Do not watch this." He did not look at her. He set his jaw, took a deep breath, and began to climb. It was not a race. It was a torture. Koha was a blaze of speed, a red-hot arrow of muscle and rage. Jonah was a slow, grinding piece of machinery. Koha took the direct route, attacking the rock, his powerful legs and arms pulling him up sheer faces. Jonah moved laterally, traversing, his years of tracking lost cattle giving him a different eye. He did not see a wall to be conquered. He saw a puzzle to be solved. He saw the deer trails. He read the wind. He knew which rock would hold and which would shift. He used the shadows of the clouds, resting for a few seconds when they passed over, conserving his energy, while Koha, in the full sun, was already dark with sweat. Jonah's lungs burned. His bad leg was a constant, screaming fire. He was not climbing. He was enduring. He was far behind. He could see Koha 100 yards above him, a small, powerful figure on a high, narrow scree slope. It was a dangerous traverse, a sheet of loose, broken shale that offered no firm footing. Koha, in his arrogance, tried to run across it. Jonah watched it happen, as if in slow motion. Koha's foot slipped. The shale gave way beneath him, a cascade of gray rock. He cried out, a sound of pure surprise, and slid. He clawed at the rock, but there was nothing to hold. He was sliding, faster and faster, toward a sheer 50-foot drop to the rocks below. This was it. Jonah stopped climbing, his heart pounding. He could just wait. He could let the land decide, just as he had proposed. Koha would fall. He would die. It would be over. Leah would be safe. But even as the thought crossed his mind, his body was moving. He was traversing, half running, half falling, his bad leg dragging, moving parallel to Koha's slide. He reached the solid rock at the end of the scree slope just as Koha's sliding body hit the edge, his fingers catching on a single, tiny root. He was dangling. His feet kicked at the empty air. His grip was slipping. He looked up, his face a mask of shocked terror, and saw Jonah standing directly above him. Koha's eyes, so full of hate, were now wide with fear. Jonah did not think. He did not weigh the options. He did not consider the future. He just acted. He knelt, bracing his bad leg against a spur of rock. It screamed in protest. He reached down with his right arm. His strong arm. "Grab my hand," he yelled. Koha, his grip failing, let go of the root and lunged, his hand slapping into Jonah's and clamping down like a steel trap. The force nearly pulled Jonah over the edge. The weight was immense. Jonah's shoulder socket felt like it was tearing. He gritted his teeth, the sound a low growl in his throat. He put every ounce of his grief, his rage at Burke, his 3 years of lonely, back-breaking work, into that single pull. He leaned back, his own muscles screaming, and hauled. Koha scrambled, his free hand finding a hold, and then his feet, with one final, agonizing grunt. Jonah pulled the warrior up, over the lip of the rock, onto the safety of the ledge. They lay on the rock, side by side, panting, their chests heaving. Koha did not speak. He did not say thank you. He rolled onto his stomach, his body shaking with adrenaline and a new, more profound humiliation. Jonah staggered to his feet. His arm felt dead. His leg was numb. He looked up. The burned pinon tree was just 20 yards further. Without a word, he turned and began to limp, step by painful step, toward the goal. He reached the tree. He placed his bloody, trembling hand on the smooth, charred wood. He was the winner. Koha arrived seconds later. He stood, his chest heaving, his face a storm of emotions so dark and violent Jonah could not read them. He looked at Jonah, then at the hand that had saved him, and then back at Jonah. He was shamed, he was beaten, and he was in debt to the one man he wanted to kill. His hatred, now poisoned with this new obligation, was absolute. The warriors and the elders were silent as they returned to the canyon floor. The council had seen. Chief Dashi stood, his face carved from ancient stone. He did not look at Jonah. He looked at Leia. "The white man is not a coward," Dashi proclaimed, his voice echoing in the quiet canyon. "He has proven his strength. He has shown mercy. He has won the right to speak." He then turned his hard gaze on his niece. "But this changes nothing. Leia, it only makes the choice harder." He raised his voice for all to hear. A formal proclamation. "The new moon is in 7 days. This is the time I gave you. That time holds. On that night, you will choose." He pointed a long, bony finger at Koha, who was staring at the ground, his knuckles white. "You can choose Koha. He will be our war chief. You will be his wife, and our people will have the alliance with Burke. And this man, Jonah Calder, will leave this land. He will ride south and never return. If he is seen again, he is an enemy." Then Dashki pointed at Jonah. "Or, you will choose this man, this rancher, and you will be outcast. You will be no longer Apache. You will have no people, no protection, no part of our world. You will be a white man's woman, and you will live in his world. Whatever that means, the choice is yours." 7 days. The warriors, one by one, turned and began the climb out of the canyon, a silent, grim procession. Leia stood frozen, her face a mask of impossible calm. But Jonah saw her hand, the one at her side, clenching and unclenching, her fingers digging into the small medicine pouch at her belt. Her eyes found his, in them. He saw no victory, only a terrible shared trap. He had won the challenge, but he had lost his simple, quiet life. He had dragged her, and himself, into an in-between world where they belonged nowhere. Koha was the last to leave. He mounted his horse, but he did not follow the others. He rode up to Jonah, his horse stamping, forcing Jonah to step back. Koha leaned down, his face inches from Jonah's, his voice a low, venomous whisper that no one else could hear. "The old man talks of laws. The old man is a fool. You touched her, you shamed me, and you pulled me from that ledge. I owe you my life, white man, and I will hate you for it, every day." His eyes were black, dead holes. "She has 7 days. If she chooses you, if she dishonors me again, I will use this life you gave me to make you watch her die. That is my law." He yanked his horse's head around and spurred it, riding up the trail without a backward glance. Jonah was left alone on the canyon floor, the smell of sulfur in his nostrils, his body screaming in a dozen places. The sun was high and hot now, baking the rocks. Long after they had all gone, he saw movement. It was Leia. She had not left with them. She was standing on the high ridge, a solitary figure against the vast, purple sky of evening. She was looking down, her gaze fixed, but he knew she was not looking at him. She was looking south, toward his ranch, a single, tiny speck in the distance. And then she turned, looking north, toward the hidden valley where her people were waiting. She was a woman balanced on the knife edge of the world, staring at 2 paths, both of which led to ruin. He watched as, unconsciously, her hand strayed, not to her medicine pouch, but to her own stomach, a flat, empty belly, a space where a future was supposed to be. The 2 days following the challenge at Coyote Narrows were a blur of aching muscles and silent, frantic planning. Jonah knew he could not just wait at his ranch for the new moon. Koha's threat was a promise. Burke's greed was a machine, and Leia was caught between them. They had to know what Burke was planning. And when... "They will be watching the ranch," Jonah said, his voice rough. "But the town, they are having a harvest dance. The whole county will be there. Drunk. Loud. No one will be looking for us if we are right in front of them." It was a dangerous, foolhardy plan, but it was the only one they had. He gave Leia one of Mary's old dresses, a dark blue calico that was too large for her, but serviceable. More importantly, he gave her a rebozo, a long, woven Mexican shawl that was common in the territory. "Keep this over your head," he instructed, his hands feeling clumsy as he showed her. "Cover your hair, your face, mostly. You do not speak, not a word. You are my new hired help, a mestiza woman from down south. You understand." Leia's face was stone, but she nodded, her dark eyes filled with an unfamiliar uncertainty. She, who was so powerful in the canyons, was now being asked to make herself small and invisible. She wrapped the shawl, the fabric smelling faintly of old soap and Jonah's long-dead wife. The disguise was a small, sharp pain for both of them. They rode into Red Mesa Crossing as the sun was setting, a fiery, apocalyptic red that bled into the purple hills. Jonah rode his horse, and Leia sat on the wagon seat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The shawl pulled low. The town was just as Jonah had predicted, but worse. It was electric with a false, brittle energy. The saloon was overflowing, spilling loud, drunken laughter onto the boardwalk. The new, half-built train depot Burke's project was draped in bunting. Even the church bell was ringing, calling people not to prayer, but to the autumn celebration. The dance was being held in the largest building in town, the massive warehouse and livery stable that belonged to Jeb Burke. Jonah tied the wagon, his hands trembling slightly. "Stay with me. Do not look at anyone. You are here to fetch supplies for me. That is all." Leia nodded, her face hidden in the shawl's deep shadow. They walked toward the warehouse. The doors were thrown wide, spilling yellow light and the manic sawing sound of a fiddle onto the dusty street. Inside, it was a cavern of noise, heat, and bodies. The air was thick with the smell of beer, sweat, cheap perfume, and horse manure from the adjoining stables. A space had been cleared on the packed earth floor, and a dozen couples were already spinning and stomping in a clumsy reel, their boots kicking up clouds of dust, and on a platform made of stacked wooden crates, Jeb Burke stood, his hands on his hips, surveying the room like a king. "My friends," he boomed, his voice cutting through the music. The fiddler trailed off, and the room grew quiet, expectant. "My good, hard-working neighbors," Jonah pulled Leia into a shadowed corner, near the back, behind a stack of barrels. From here, they could see, but not be seen. "We have built this town," Burke roared, his face slick with sweat. "We built it with our bare hands, with our sweat, and with our blood. And now, progress is coming." He pointed a thick finger toward the new depot, the railroad, a new age of prosperity for Red Mesa Crossing. A ragged cheer went up from the crowd. "But," Burke said, his voice dropping, becoming intimate, "there are those who would stand in the way of progress. There are shadows, savages, who do not understand our world, who would rather burn and kill than work and build." The crowd's mood soured, the cheers turning to low murmurs of agreement. "Just last week," Burke continued, his voice taking on a righteous, mournful tone, "the Miller family, good people, God-fearing people, their homestead burned to the ground, their cattle butchered. And what of the children?" He paused, letting the question hang. He did not need to describe anything. The crowd's own fear filled in the terrible, silent blanks. A woman in the front row, Mrs. Davies from the general store, began to sob. "The army is too slow," Burke yelled, "feeding on their fear. The government is too far away. It is time we, the people, took responsibility for our own safety. It is time we cleaned house. It is time we solved the Apache problem." Once and for all, another cheer. This one uglier, deeper, and full of hate. Elle's hand, hidden under the shawl, gripped Jonah's arm. Her fingers were digging into his skin, sharp and cold. Jonah watched, sickened. This was not a dance. It was a lynching party in disguise. Leia tugged on his sleeve, a sharp, bird-like motion. She whispered, her voice barely audible. "I must listen. The men, they will speak of the plan." Before Jonah could stop her, she had slipped away from him. She did not go into the light. She was a shadow herself, melting into the deeper darkness along the warehouse wall. moving behind the clusters of men who were now talking, emboldened by Burke's speech. She was a ghost, a servant, invisible to their eyes. Jonah's heart was in his throat. He was helpless, forced to wait, pretending to examine a harness on the wall, his back to the room. He could hear the fragments of conversation. Burke is right. A good Indian is a dead Indian. Heard they are moving up to the high country. Saltbone Ridge, Koha. That is the warrior. A mean one. But Burke's got him on a leash. He was straining to hear more when Leah suddenly reappeared at his side. She was shaking, her whole body trembling, though she made no sound. Her hand, when it grabbed his, was slick with cold sweat. "He knows," she whispered, her voice fractured with terror. "Burke, Koha, they know. The ambush. When my people move to Saltbone Ridge, he will be there, with Koha and soldiers. He said a final solution. Jonah, they will kill them all. My mother's people. The children." Her panic was a physical thing, radiating from her, making the air around them crackle. She had forgotten her disguise. Her voice, though a whisper, was too high, too urgent. "Hey, now!" A thick, slurred voice bellowed from behind them. A large, drunken cowboy, one of Burke's men, was weaving toward them. He had a bottle in one hand and a leer on his face. "What is this?" "Calder, you are too good to drink with us, but you are not too good for this little brown mouse." He reached out, his hand disgustingly fast, and snagged the edge of Leah's shawl. "What you got under there?" "Girl, let's have a look." He yanked. The shawl came free. Leah's head was exposed, her long, black hair, unmistakable, coiled in its thick Apache braids. Time stopped. The fiddler was playing. The crowd was laughing, but in their dark corner, the world had just ended. The drunk's eyes went wide, his mouth forming an O of pure, malicious surprise. "Well, I'll be," he breathed. An Indian. He had no time to shout. Jonah moved without thinking. It was not a thought. It was an explosion. He grabbed Leah by the waist with one arm, spun her around, and slammed her and himself into the dark, narrow gap between two 10-foot-high stacks of hay bales. He pushed her deep into the scratchy darkness, his body following, pressing her against the hay, his chest to her chest, his body completely shielding hers from the opening. What in the hell? They heard the drunk's voice, confused. Just outside. "Calder, you shut up." "Cletus," another man said. "He is just with his whore. Leave him be." "But I seen you are drunk. Get over here. Burke is buying." The footsteps stumbled away. Jonah and Leah were left in the narrow, dark canyon of hay. They were not moving. They were not breathing. The space was so tight they were fused. Jonah's face was buried in the space between her neck and shoulder. He could smell her. Not just the sage, but the dust of the ride, the starch of Mary's old dress, and the clean, sharp, terrified scent of her skin. He could feel the frantic, rabbit-quick pulse of the vein in her neck. Leah's hands were trapped between their bodies, her palms flat against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against her hands, a wild, powerful drumbeat that was as fast as her own. His breath, hot and ragged, was on her ear. The rough wool of his jacket was scratching her cheek. The fiddler started a new song, a fast, furious reel. The floorboards just outside their hiding place began to thud and shake as the stomping of the dancers grew more wild. The air was filled with shouts, laughter, music, and the smell of hay. They were trapped in an island of silence, intimacy, and pure, animal panic. Leah gasped, a tiny, choked sound. She needed air. She tried to turn her head. Jonah! His mind still reeling, his body acting on an instinct he did not know he possessed, did the only thing he could think of to keep her quiet, to keep them hidden. He shifted, his hand moving from the hay bale to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in the thick braid. He turned her face toward his. She was looking up, her eyes wide and black and full of terror, not of him, but of the world just outside. And he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not slow. It was a collision. It was hard and desperate and silencing. his lips crushed against hers. A brutal, immediate act of possession and concealment. It was the only thing he could do to stop her from screaming, to stop himself from running. For a second, she was rigid, a block of ice in his arms. And then, something broke. Her fingers, which had been pushing against his chest, suddenly clenched. They grabbed the rough fabric of his shirt, twisted it, and held on, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning apart. She did not kiss him back. She answered him. She met the force of his kiss with her own desperate, pent-up terror. His other arm, which had been braced against the hay, unconsciously slid around her. It found the small of her back and pulled, pulling her off her feet, pressing the entire length of her body against his. He could feel the strong muscles of her thighs, the curve of her hips, the sudden, desperate rise and fall of her chest, all crushed against him. Her breath became his breath, and the kiss changed. The brutal, silencing pressure eased. The panic subsided, replaced by something else. The fiddle music, the stomping feet, the shouts, they all faded into a dull, distant roar. His lips softened on hers. It was no longer an act of hiding. It was an act of finding. He tasted the dust from the road and a faint, strange sweetness. He was not just kissing a woman. He was kissing the survivor from the canyon, the woman who had watched him bury his dead, the woman who had shared his rage against Burke. He felt her body, which had been iron-rigid, slump against him. Her fingers uncurled from their death grip on his shirt and slid upward, her hands framing his jaw, her calloused thumbs pressing into his skin. He felt a single, hot tear escape from her closed eye and slide onto his cheek, where it mixed with his own sweat. It was a kiss of shared grief, shared danger, and a terrifying, shared future. It was the most honest thing either of them had done in years. And I told her, I said, "Martha, that is no way to behave at a church function." A woman's voice. Close. Jonah and Leah sprang apart, their bodies separating with a gasp, as if they had been burned. They stumbled out of the narrow gap, blinking, disoriented. 3 women from the Red Mesa Church, their arms linked, were walking past. They stopped. They stared. They saw Jonah, his shirt untucked, his hair wild, hay clinging to his jacket. They saw the strange girl, her face flushed, her lips swollen and damp, her hair in those braids. Jonah and Leah stood frozen, their chests heaving. They quickly, awkwardly, tried to fix themselves. Jonah brushed at his jacket. Leah, her hands shaking, tried to find her shawl. The women did not speak. They just looked, their eyes, bright with judgment, took in every detail. One of them, Mrs. Davies, the one who had been crying, let out a small, scandalized gasp. Without a word, they turned and walked away, huddling together, their voices an immediate, furious buzz of whispers. Jonah knew, in that instant, that the rumor was now fact. Indian lover. The words would be all over town by morning. He grabbed Leah's hand. "We have to go, now." He pulled her, running through the crowd, ignoring the shouts and the stares. They burst out of the back door of the warehouse, into the cool, dark alley. They stood there for a second, gasping for air. The sound of the fiddle music, a thin, alien noise behind them. Neither of them spoke. They did not have to. From the deepest shadow of the alley, a shape moved. A match was struck, the sulfur scraping, and a small flame flared to life. It illuminated, for just a second, the face of Jeb Burke. He was leaning against the wall, smoking a cigar, his small eyes glittering in the sudden light. He had been there. He had seen them run. He saw Jonah's disheveled state. He saw Leah's face, her braids, her terror. He saw Jonah holding her hand. Burke did not move. He did not shout. He did not reach for his gun. He took a long, slow puff of his cigar, the ember glowing red, illuminating his face with a demonic light, and he smiled. It was a slow, cold, utterly satisfied smile. He had seen everything he needed to see. He had his proof. He had his scapegoat. He had his perfect reason. He let them go, watching them untie the wagon in a panic and scramble away into the night. He had all the time in the world. They did not return to the ranch. Jonah knew, with a sickening certainty, that Burke's smile was a death warrant. His home was no longer a sanctuary. It was the center of a target. He steered the wagon hard off the main road, the wheels screaming as they hit the rocky, uneven ground. He drove them into the darkening wilderness, pushing the horse through dry washes and stands of ocotillo, heading for the one place he might be safe. The sky was an ugly, bruised purple, and the air was heavy, holding its breath. A low, distant rumble confirmed his fear. A storm was coming. Hours later, long after the lights of Red Mesa Crossing were swallowed by the horizon, they reached at a line shack. It was a tiny, crude cabin, barely 10 feet square, built of rough pine and a tin roof, sitting on the farthest, most desolate edge of his grazing land. He used it during roundups, a place to escape the cold, but it was little more than a box. He unhitched the horse, his movements jerky with exhaustion and adrenaline, and led it into the small lean-to. Leia was already at the door, her hand on the latch, her body rigid, still vibrating with the terror of their escape. "In," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. He followed her, pulling the heavy door shut and dropping the thick wooden bar. The world vanished. They were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. For a moment, there was no sound but their own ragged breathing, the air in the tiny space already thick with their shared fear. Jonah fumbled on a high shelf, his fingers finding a tin of matches and a lantern. A match scraped, flared, and the small room was illuminated in a weak, yellow glow. It was cramped, a narrow wooden bunk with a single, dirty blanket, a small, cold hearth, a 3-legged stool. The walls were raw wood. It smelled of old smoke, dry rot, and pine. The first fat drop of rain hit the tin roof with the sound of a pistol shot. Then another, and another. Within seconds, a low rumble became a deafening roar as the sky opened. The storm, the first major thunderstorm of the season, hit them with the force of a physical blow. Winds shrieked through the cracks in the walls, and the tin roof boomed and rattled under the assault of the rain. They were trapped, not just in the shack, but in the situation. "We have to warn them," Leia said, her voice tight. She was standing by the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, the borrowed dress soaked, salt bone ridge. "Burke, the soldiers. I must go. Go." Jonah lit a small fire in the hearth, his hands shaking. "You cannot go anywhere. Not in this, and not alone. They will be looking for you. For us. Then you will show me the way," she said. It was not a request. "You will show me the fastest way to the ridge. I will go. You can go back. Hide." Jonah stood up from the fire and faced her. The small space was electric, not just from the storm, but from the raw-edged panic and the leftover, confused intimacy of the kiss. "Hide," he said, his voice rising. "That is what you think I will do. Just point you toward the slaughter and go back to my empty house. That is what you do. Is it not?" She shot back, her fear turning to a cold, sharp anger. "You hide. You have been hiding for 3 years. You hide behind your fences. You hide behind your silence. You hide behind your poor widower's grief. You are willing to tell me the truth about Burke. You are willing to give me a map, but you will not put your own body on the line." The words hit him harder than a fist. She had found the one, rotten, hollow spot deep inside him, and driven a knife into it. "You do not know what you are talking about?" he snarled, turning away, poking the fire with a stick, his knuckles white. "I know what I see," she cried, stepping toward him, her eyes blazing in the firelight. "You say you are afraid. You are not afraid. You are hollow. You are dead already. You are a ghost, like your wife. You will not risk anything because you have already decided that you are not allowed to live. Stop," he roared, wheeling on her, the stick clattering from his hand. "You want to know what I am afraid of? You, a knife Koha's threats. No, I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid of surviving." The confession ripped out of his throat, raw and bleeding. The storm outside seemed to pause. "Listening. I have done it before," he yelled, his face inches from hers, his body trembling. I sat in that house. I watched my wife. I watched Mary die. I watched her burn with fever. I held her hand, and when it was over, I was still breathing. The world did not end. I got up the next day, and I fed the horses. I buried her, and I buried our son, who never even took a breath, and I lived. Do you know what that feels like? To be the one left standing, to be the one who has to shovel the dirt, and then walk back to an empty house. His voice broke, the anger collapsing into a terrible, agonizing vulnerability. I am not afraid of losing my life. Leia, I am terrified of losing yours. I am terrified of you going to that ridge, and me hearing about it later, me surviving it, me being the one left again. I cannot be the only one left again. I am a coward. You are right, but not in the way you think. He slumped against the wall, his whole body shaking, his defenses utterly, finally, gone. The tiny room was silent. Save for the wild roar of the rain on the tin roof and the hissing of the fire, the argument was over. The truth was out, laid bare and bleeding on the floor. Leia just watched him. Her own anger was gone, washed away by the raw, painful honesty of his admission. He was not a ghost. He was a man in terrible, living pain. She did not move for a long time. The wind howled, a long, mournful cry that seemed to echo his. Then, slowly, she crossed the tiny space. Her boots were quiet on the plank floor. He was looking at the fire, his face averted, his jaw tight. He flinched when he felt her presence, but he did not pull away. She reached up, her hand trembling just slightly. It was not a gesture of pity. It was one of decision. She placed her warm, calloused palm against his cheek, forcing him to look at her. I did not come to you for a perfect hero, she whispered, her voice so low he barely heard it over the storm. My people have enough heroes. They die. I did not come for a man who is not afraid. Her thumb brushed, just once, across his cheekbone. I came, she said, her dark eyes holding his, for a real man, with all the cracks, with all the scars. She held his gaze, her own fear and doubt still there, but overshadowed by a fierce, sudden resolve. And she rose on her toes, and she pulled his head down. The kiss, this time, was not a collision. It was a surrender. It was slow. It was deep. It held the wet, cold taste of the storm and the heat of the fire. All at once, it was not a kiss of panic or of concealment. It was a kiss of choice. Jonah's response was not a thought. It was a drowning man taking a breath. His body, which had been rigid with tension, went limp and then alive. His hands, which had been braced against the wall, came up. They found her face, his thumbs stroking the high, strong line of her cheekbones. He kissed her back, a long, slow exploration, a question and an answer all in one. All the defenses he had built, all the grief he had worn like armor, all the fear of being left, it all just fell. It did not break. It dissolved. He pulled her away from the wall, his hands sliding from her face, down her neck, his fingers tangling in her still damp hair. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her back, crushing her to him. He felt her sigh against his lips, a sound of release that was echoed by the thunder. The rain was a drumbeat, sealing them in. He walked her backward, 1 step, 2 steps, until her back met the rough pine wall. Her hands, which had been on his face, slid around his neck, her fingers locking, holding him. They were still in their wet, trail-dusted clothes. He was still wearing Mary's dress. It did not matter. He kissed her jawline, her neck, the hollow of her throat, his breath coming in ragged gasps that matched hers. He helped her with the damp, heavy cloak she still wore. She fumbled with the buttons on his wet jacket. The layers fell away, tossed onto the floor, leaving them in the soft, thin clothes they wore beneath. His hands were no longer hesitant. They moved over her, learning the shape of her. Through the thin calico, he felt the strong, wiry muscles of her back, the curve of her spine, the sharp line of her shoulders. He felt the tremor that ran through her body as his hand grazed her side. And he realized, with a jolt, that he was trembling. Too. She pulled back, just enough to look at him. In the firelight, her face was soft, her eyes dark and wide. She reached up and touched the scar on his forearm, the one she had touched in the barn. Then she pulled his hand to her lips and kissed the scar. A sound, half groan, half sob, tore from his throat. She took his hand and led him the 2 steps to the bunk. It was too small. She pulled the single, rough wool blanket from it, and it fell to the floor in a heap. She sank onto it, her legs folding beneath her, and she pulled him down with her. They fell onto the blanket, a tangle of arms and legs. The floor hard, but the moment soft. The firelight played over them, casting shadows that danced with the storm. Kiss followed kiss. They were no longer desperate, but deep and long, and searching. They were mapping a new territory. In the dark, he whispered her name. Just to hear it, the sound strange and new in his own mouth, she whispered back, not in English, not in Apache, but in a low, wordless sound of need. He laid her back on the blanket, his body half covering hers, his hand stroking her hair, pushing it back from her face. She looked up at him, her breathing rapid, her lips parted. He saw the faint blush on her high cheekbones. He touched her stomach, his hand flat against the calico, just over the place they had spoken of. A child, he whispered, the words thick, born of this in this born of choice. She whispered back, and her hands, strong and sure, pulled him down to her. They lay tangled in the blanket for hours. They did not speak again. There was only the sound of the rain slackening to a steady, soft rhythm, the pop and hiss of the fire, and the sound of 2 separate heartbeats. Finally, learning to beat in time, they fell asleep, not as lovers, but as survivors. Their bodies curled together for warmth and for the simple, profound comfort of not being alone. The morning came, not with a sunrise, but with a change in the light. The storm had passed. The air was washed clean, faint. Gray light streamed through the cracks in the walls. Jonah woke first. He was sore, his body aching from the climb, from the tension, from sleeping on the floor. Leia was still asleep, her back to him, her breathing deep and even. She was curled under the blanket. He watched the light play on the black, unbound river of her hair. He felt still. The terror was gone. The grief was still there. But it was not a chain. It was just a part of him. Like his limp, she stirred, rolling over. Her eyes opened, dark and clear. She did not startle. She just looked at him, and the memory of the night was in her gaze. A faint blush rose on her cheeks, but her eyes held no shame, no regret. She pulled the blanket up to her chin. Jonah reached out, his hand hesitating. He touched her stomach, his fingers light. Just to graze on the blanket, if it happens, he said, his voice a low, mourning rasp. A child. I do not want him or her to grow up like this, hiding, running in fear. Leia's hand covered his. Then we do not run. We do not run. He agreed. He knew what it meant. We go to Saltbone Ridge, together. They were not just saving her people. They were fighting for their own. A sound, sharp and out of place, sliced through the morning quiet, a horse's whicker. Close. Jonah was on his feet in a second, his heart leaping into his throat. He motioned for Leia to be silent, and he moved to the small, greasy window. He peered through a crack in the wall. The small clearing in front of the shack was full of men, horses, guns. He saw Jeb Burke, sitting on his large black stallion, a smug, satisfied look on his face. He saw Owen and Clyde, their rifles already drawn. He saw a half-dozen townsmen, their faces grim, convinced they were doing the right thing. And he saw Marshal Reed Calloway, his face a mask of weary resignation, his hand resting on his pistol. A voice, not Burke's, but one of the townsmen, called out. Jonah Calder, we know you are in there, and we know you got the Apache woman with you. Come out, or we burn you out. Jonah looked at Leia. The peace of the morning was gone, shattered. Burke's voice boomed. That is right. Calder Marshal has a warrant for you, for the murder of Cletus. The man you killed in the alley last night. Jonah's blood ran cold. Cletus! The drunk! Come out! Calder Calloway yelled, his voice official. Dead. You are under arrest. For murder, and for collusion with the Apache. The heavy bar of the lined shack door was lifted from the outside. The door scraped open, flooding the tiny, dark space with hostile morning light. Jonah and Leia stood frozen, blinking like owls, their hands still half linked. Jeb Burke sat on his horse, a king on a black throne, a shotgun resting comfortably in the crook of his arm. His smile was gone, replaced by a flat, business-like satisfaction. Well, Burke said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. Ain't this a cozy picture? The town's grieving widower, all nested up with his Apache whore. That is enough. Jeb, Marshal Calloway said, his voice flat with disgust. He dismounted, his spurs silent in the damp earth. He did not look at Leia. He looked only at Jonah. Burke, here, found Cletus's body in an arroyo on his way out of town, Calloway said, his voice a dead monotone. Stove in head. You were the last man seen arguing with him. Arguing, Jonah said, his voice a croak. I pushed him. He pulled her shawl. Does not matter, Burke said, his voice lazy. All they saw was you, dragging her out the back. Then Cletus disappears, and we find you here, shacked up. It paints a bad picture. Calder, a real bad one. I am not going to let you lynch him. Jeb, Calloway said, his eyes flicking to Burke. But I am taking him in, on suspicion of murder. And, he added, his voice hardening, for harboring a fugitive Indian. That is against territorial law. He pulled a pair of iron handcuffs from his belt. Turn around. Jonah, hands behind your back. Jonah looked at Leia. Her face was a mask of stone, but her eyes were wild. He saw the trajectory. He would be in a cell, and she would be left out here, for Burke's men or Koha's pride. He made his choice. He stepped in front of her, his body shielding hers from the men outside. His face was bruised with exhaustion, his clothes rumpled, and the firelight from the night before seemed to have left a mark on his skin, a faint flush on his neck that any of the men could see. She had nothing to do with this, Jonah said, his voice loud and clear, trying to project a strength he did not feel. She was my new hired hand, from down south, a mestiza girl. She got scared at the dance. I brought her out here for her own safety. I forced her to stay. She is my employee. She has done nothing. He was lying, badly, desperately, offering them a version of the truth they could, perhaps, accept. But Leia would not have it. She stepped out from behind him, her head high. She was not wearing the shawl. Her long black braids were stark against the faded blue of Mary's dress. She did not look like a frightened servant. She looked like a queen. She looked past Jonah, past Calloway, and straight at Jeb Burke. My name is not girl, she said, her voice ringing in the clean morning air. Clear as a bell. I am Leia, daughter of Ishkay, of the White Mountain people. I am not his servant. I am here by my own choice. A collective gasp went through the posse. This was not some cowed, half-breed girl. This was a proud Apache woman, claiming her place. And in doing so, she had just confirmed every accusation. Jonah's heart sank. He had tried to save her, but she had refused to be saved by a lie. Well, Burke chuckled, that settles that. You heard her, Marshal, collusion. Calloway's face was grim. He grabbed Jonah's arms. Do not fight me, son. He snapped the cold iron cuffs around Jonah's wrists. The click was loud. Final. What about her, Owen Burke asked, his rifle leveled at Leia's chest. She is Apache, Jeb said, as if that explained everything. We will escort her to the marshal's office for questioning. Separately. Jonah knew what that meant. She would never make it to town. Before he could shout, before Calloway could even protest. A gunshot cracked from the high ridge to the north. A chip of rock exploded from the ground. 3 feet from Owen's horse. Everyone frozen. Another shot. This one kicked up dirt near Clyde's feet. They were not kill shots. They were warning shots. Ambush, a townsman screamed. The posse, which had been a confident mob moments before, dissolved into chaos. Men spurred their horses, wheeling in confusion, trying to find a target that was not there. "It is her people," Burke roared, leveling his shotgun toward the ridge. In that single, chaotic second, Jonah saw it. Leia did not run. She simply vanished. She used the panic, the screaming horses, the men's confusion, and she slipped back. Not into the shack, but into the dense scrub. She was a ghost. One second she was there, a woman in a blue dress. The next, she was just a patch of empty, shivering brush. She is gone. Clyde yelled, pointing. "Forget her," Burke bellowed. "We got him. Get him on a horse. We are going back." Jonah was thrown onto the back of his own wagon, his hands cuffed behind him, his bad leg twisting uselessly. Burke, Calloway, and the rest of the posse spurred their horses, galloping away from the line shack, dragging him like a prisoner of war back to Red Mesa Crossing. Leia watched them go, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She waited until the dust had settled, until the sound of their hoofbeats was a faint rumor on the wind. Then she, too, began to move, running, not toward the ridges, but parallel to the road, back toward the town. By the time she reached the outskirts of Red Mesa Crossing, it was midday. She found what she was looking for in a hidden wash her uncle, Dashki, and 3 warriors, their faces streaked with grim purpose. It was they who had fired the shots. "You are safe," Dashki said. It was a statement of relief. "He is not," Leia said, her voice flat. She was already checking her horse, tightening the cinch. "They have him? In the jail. Burke claims he murdered a man." The warriors looked at each other. "He is a white man." One said, "Let them hang him. This is not our fight." "He is the reason we have a fight," Leia spun on him, her fury a tangible thing. "Burke will hang him. Then he will come for us at Saltbone Ridge. He will use Jonah's death as the reason. He will say the Apache lover got what he deserved, and that we are the animals who drove him to it. He will have the whole town behind him." She turned to her uncle, her eyes pleading. "Dashi, you gave me 7 days. You gave him a test. He passed. He showed mercy to Koha. He is not them. He is the only white man who has stood between us and them. If we leave him to hang, if we abandon the one man who chose us, then we are already dead. Our spirit is gone. We are no better than the animals Burke says we are." Dashki was silent, his ancient face a mask of grief. He knew she was right. "It is a trap, girl," he said. "The town is a fortress. I do not care. I am going. You will not go alone." The voice came from the shadows. Koha emerged, leading his horse. He was favoring his left side, and a dark, bloody stain was seeping through a bandage on his ribs. "You," Leia breathed. "I had my own meeting with Burke's men," Koha grunted, his face tight with pain. "They are not just watching the ranch. They are watching the trails. They were not as merciful as the widower." He looked at Leia, his eyes a complex mixture of hatred and a new, grudging respect. He had heard her speech. "He is a weak fool," Koha said, nodding toward the town. "He should have let me fall, but he did not." He spat on the ground. "The white men, they will hang him. They will hang him like a dog. This is not honor. A man should die in battle. He should not be strangled by a rope in a cage." His warrior pride, his deep ingrained sense of combat and honor, was offended by the very idea of a lynching. He would not allow the man who had saved him, the man Leia had chosen, to be disposed of like garbage. It was a reflection on his own honor. "The girl is right," Koha said, his voice flat. "We cannot let them do this. We cannot let Burke do this." A desperate, insane plan was formed in the dusty arroyo. It was a plan of fire and chaos. Night fell on Red Mesa Crossing. The town was a powder keg. Burke had spent the afternoon in the saloon, buying drinks, spinning his tale. Jonah Calder, the Indian lover, had killed poor Cletus in a rage and had been caught in his den of sin. The mob was drunk, righteous, and ready. They were gathered outside the small, single-room jail, their torches casting flickering, demonic shadows. Inside, Jonah sat on a filthy cot, his cuffed hands in his lap. He could hear them. "Hang him, hang the traitor." Marshal Reed Calloway stood on the jailhouse steps, his shotgun in his hands, his face pale but set. He will get a trial. I will not have a lynching in my town. Go home, he is your prisoner. Marshal Burke's voice roared. Or are you on his side? 2. The mob surged, and Calloway raised his shotgun. And then, from the north end of town, a scream, not of anger, but of fire. A sheet of flame erupted into the sky. Koha and his warriors had lit Burke's hay warehouse, the same warehouse from the dance. The dry, packed bales went up like a bomb. Fire at the warehouse. The mob, torn between two bloodlusts, hesitated. It is the Apache, Burke roared. Realizing the trick, they are attacking the town. Get your rifles. Shoot to kill as if on cue. A new sound joined the roar of the fire. A thunder. A low, earthly rumble that grew into a stampede. Koha's other warriors had broken the fences on Burke's stock pens. 200 head of terrified longhorn cattle, their eyes wide and their horns gleaming in the firelight, poured into the main street. The town dissolved into pure, screaming chaos. Men were firing their guns wildly into the night. The mob scattered, climbing onto roofs, diving under wagons. The cattle, maddened by the fire and the noise, were a wave of destruction. Marshal Calloway, his duty torn, ran toward the fire, trying to organize a defense. Burke and his brothers, their lynching forgotten, were trying to save their cattle, screaming at their men. In the confusion, a shadow detached itself from the alley behind the jail. Leah, she had a thin-bladed knife, and in her other hand, a heavy ring of keys she had stolen from the marshal's drunk deputy. She slid into the dark, suddenly empty jailhouse. Jonah was on his feet, his eyes wide. Leah, you are crazy. Get out. Shut up, she whispered, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key. She tried one. It failed. Another, Leah, go. They will kill you. I am not leaving you. She found the right key. The lock on the cuffs clicked. The heavy iron fell from his wrists. His hands were free, but raw and bleeding. Her fingers brushed his, trembling. There was no time. Come, she said, pulling him. He was weak, his legs stiff, his body bruised from the wagon ride. He leaned on her, and her strength surprised him. She was as solid as the rock of her canyon. They slipped out the back door, into an alley filled with smoke and the bellowing of cattle. They ran, ducking low, 2 shadows in a world of fire. A drunk stumbled out of the saloon, saw them, and pointed, his mouth open. Leah did not hesitate. She grabbed a loose piece of timber and swung it, hitting him in the knees. He went down, and they ran on. They hid, for a terrifying minute, under the floor of the general store, crawling into the dark, dusty space. They lay flat on their bellies, the boards of the floor just above their heads, the sound of boots and hooves thundering past. They were face to face in the pitch black, their breath mingling, their bodies pressed together. It was not the intimacy of the shack. It was the desperate, breathless intimacy of 2 animals in a trap, their hearts beating in the same frantic, terrified rhythm. We have to get to the horses, she whispered, her breath hot on his cheek. They waited. The noise moved on. They slid out, covered in dirt and cobwebs, and ran for the livery stable at the edge of town, where Koha's men had left their mounts. They were almost there when they saw him. Gray Antelope, one of the oldest, most respected elders of Leah's people, a man who had taught her the names of the stars. He was supposed to be with the women, moving toward the ridge, but he had come back, a warrior to the end. He was in the middle of the street, trying to pull a small Apache child, who had fallen from a horse, out of the path of the stampede. Jeb Burke, on his black horse, saw them. He saw the elder. He saw the child. He saw them as nothing but targets. Yet the old one, Burke, roared. He did not fire. He let his brother Owen do it. Gray Antelope had just lifted the child, tossing him to another warrior. When the rifle shot cracked, the old man stiffened. He looked down, a strange, surprised look on his face, at the red flower blooming on his chest. He did not fall. He turned, slowly, and looked straight at Leah, who was frozen in the mouth of the alley. His eyes, for a second, were full of a terrible sadness. Then he pitched forward, dead before he hit the dust. The warriors, with a scream of pure, animal rage, grabbed his body, pulling it from the hooves, and vanished into the darkness. Leia stood, unable to move. A single, tearing sob was ripped from her throat. It was a sound of such profound, agonizing loss that Jonah felt it in his own bones. She walked out into the street. She knelt, her hand touching the dark, sticky pool of blood where he had fallen. She looked at her hand, covered in the blood of her teacher, her friend. She did not cry. Her face, in the light of the burning town, was transformed. The softness, the vulnerability, the fear, it was all burned away. All that was left was a terrible, cold, and perfect clarity. She stood up. She wiped her bloody hand, not on the dirt, but on the fabric of Mary's blue dress, leaving a stark, dark red smear over her own heart. She looked at Jonah, her eyes black, dead, and full of a purpose that terrified him. "He will not live," she said, her voice a low, gravelly whisper that was not her own. "I will not let him live to see the sun rise over Saltbone Ridge." Jonah looked at her, at the blood on her dress, at the fire in her eyes. He looked at the burning town. He looked at the body of the drunk in the street. He was no longer Jonah Calder, the widower. He was no longer the man hiding from his grief. He was just a man, standing at the end of the world, with a woman who had just declared a war. He reached out and took her hand. Not the bloody one, the other one. He was not saving her. She was not saving him. They were just together, two people, walking out of the flames, toward the final, waiting darkness. The ride to Saltbone Ridge was a desperate, lung-searing race against the coming dawn. They rode hard, a strange and broken alliance, Jonah, his wrists raw from the cuffs. Leia, the blood of gray antelope like a terrible badge on her dress, and Koha, his face a mask of pain, his hand pressed tight against the seeping wound in his side. They were followed by the few warriors who had survived the night, their faces grim, their hearts full of fire and grief. They pushed their horses past exhaustion, the sound of their hoofbeats a frantic drum against the silence of the high desert. They were not just riding to something. They were riding from everything. They reached the ridge just as the sky was turning a sick, gray-purple. Saltbone Ridge was a massive spine of white limestone, a place of ghosts, its surface bleached and cracked like the bones of a long-dead giant. Far below, in the canyons, they could see them, the last of Leia's people, a slow-moving line of women, children, and old men, herding their few goats and horses toward a narrow pass that led south, toward the Mexican border. They were still too close. They were exposed. Koha, his voice a ragged rasp, slid from his horse. They are too slow. Burke will catch them in the open. Jonah was already dismounting, his mind sharpened by his own long-gone war and the new, terrible clarity of the night. Scanning the terrain, he saw the half-finished work of the railroad piles of timber, discarded tools, and, most importantly, several crates of dynamite, left for blasting a path through the rock. "We do not have to outrun him." "Koha," Jonah said, his voice hard, authoritative. "We just have to stop him. Here." A new plan was forged, not in a quiet arroyo, but in the heat of the coming battle, a desperate fusion of two minds. Jonah, the veteran, knew explosives and firing lines. Koha, the warrior, knew the rock, the wind, and the ways of the land. "The pass," Jonah said, pointing. "We funnel the women and children through. Faster. Leia, you have to go. Get them moving." "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice flat, the blood on her dress a dark, stiff promise. "You are not leaving," Jonah agreed, his eyes meeting hers. "You are leading. Go, now. We will hold this ridge." She did not argue. She saw the new, hard strength in his face. She grabbed two warriors and galloped down the slope to hurry her people. "The rest of you," Jonah said, turning to Koha and his men. He pointed to the crates. "That is the white man's thunder. We are going to make it sing." For 2 frantic hours, they worked. They were not Apache and white. They were just men against a clock. They moved like demons, hauling the heavy sticks of dynamite, embedding them in the rock face directly above the main trail. The only wide approach to the ridge, they ran fuses, long and short. At the same time, Koha, despite his wound, directed his men, piling rocks, creating deadfalls, and positioning his few remaining warriors in high, hidden crevices. They were building a trap. They finished just as the sun broke the horizon. And with the sun, they came. First, a cloud of dust. Then, the sound of 100 horses. It was Burke. He was leading his posse. Owen and Clyde riding beside him, their arms in fresh slings from Jonah's shots, their faces twisted with hate. With him were the railroad gunmen, mercenaries with new rifles. But it was what was behind them that made Jonah's blood run cold. A full troop of United States cavalry, their blue uniforms and yellow stripes, a terrible, clean line, their sabers glinting, their flags snapping in the morning wind. They were led by a young lieutenant, his face stern, who was clearly taking his orders from a very confident Jeb Burke. "He did it," Jonah whispered, his mouth dry. "He brought the army. Now," Koha grunted, knocking an arrow, his face slick with sweat and pain. "We fight. Burke's men, a disorganized rabble, hooted and yelled, firing their pistols into the air, eager for the slaughter. The cavalry, in contrast, was a silent, disciplined machine, fanning out into a skirmish line. "Hold," Koha screamed to his men. "Wait for them to enter the trap." The battle began. Koha, in a stroke of genius, sent 2 warriors to the far flank to light a grass fire. The wind, coming from the east, blew a thick, acrid cloud of smoke across the battlefield, confusing the soldiers, breaking their clean lines. Under the cover of this smoke, the battle dissolved into a series of brutal, close-range skirmishes. Koha's men were masters of this. They appeared from the rocks, fired, and vanished, their arrows finding the railroad men, their knives silent and effective. Jonah was higher, perched on a ledge, his borrowed Winchester hot in his hands. He was not a warrior. He was a marksman. And he was not a murderer. He fired, his old training coming back, his breathing slow. He did not shoot the soldiers. He aimed with terrible, cold precision. At Burke's men, a railroad man, lining up a shot on Koha, suddenly screamed and grabbed his shoulder, his rifle clattering. Another, trying to light a torch to burn out a hiding warrior, found his wrist shatter. Jonah was disabling them, one by one, breaking the spine of Burke's private army, but meticulously avoiding the blue uniforms. He knew that the first dead soldier would turn this from a skirmish into a massacre. Burke, his face a mask of purple rage, saw his men falling. He saw his plan dissolving. He looked up, and through a swirl of smoke, he saw him. "Jonah, the cause of all this, you!" Burke roared, his voice lost in the gunfire. "You, I will kill you myself." He lost his mind. In a fit of pure, reckless fury, he spurred his horse, not at the warriors, but straight up the unstable scree slope, heading for Jonah. "Owen Clyde, with me. Get him his 2 wounded." Terrified sons had no choice but to follow. They scrambled up the slope, a desperate, clumsy charge. Jonah saw them coming. He raised his rifle. He could end this. 3 shots. He fired. The shot went wide, intentionally. He did not want to kill them. He was not Burke. "Go back," he yelled. "You fools! Go back, Clyde!" His eyes wide with panic, raised his pistol. He fired wildly. The shot hit the rock near Jonah's head, stinging his cheek with stone fragments. Jonah fired again, this time for real, but low. The bullet tore through the meat of Owen's shoulder, the same one from before. Owen screamed and fell from his horse. Clyde, trying to avoid his brother, slipped. Their panicked, clumsy movements were all it took. The loose shale, already unstable, gave way. It was not a rock slide. It was a crumbling. Both men and their horses tumbled down a 20-foot drop into a shallow ravine, their screams cut short by the sickening crack of breaking bone. They were out of the fight. Below, the battle was reaching its peak. The women and children were almost through the pass, but the last group was pinned down. And then, Leia, she ran, not from the gunfire, but into it. She had abandoned her horse. She was on foot, the tattered blue dress a strange flag in the middle of the battle. She ran to the last huddled group of women, who were frozen in terror. She screamed at them, in Apache, in English, "Move, move! Life is that way, death is here." Choose bullets kicked up the dust around her feet. A shot tore the shawl from her shoulder. Another snapped through her hair. A burning, invisible line. She did not flinch. She was a figure of pure, terrifying will, a bridge between two worlds, and she pulled her people, by sheer force of her own courage, into the safety of the pass. Jonah watched her, his heart in his throat. He had never seen anything so brave, a beautiful whore. Hey, Calder Jonah spun. Jeb Burke was there. He had made it. He was on foot, his face covered in soot, his fine waistcoat torn, his eyes a tiny, burning red. His shotgun was gone. His pistol was empty. He was just a man. "You have cost me everything." Burke wheezed, his chest heaving. He lunged. They collided. It was not a fight. It was a brawl. They fell, rolling on the narrow, unstable ledge, just yards from the half-finished railroad line. Jonah's bad leg buckled, and Burke was on him, his great weight pinning him. Burke's hands were on his throat, his thick thumbs digging in. "I killed your wife," Burke hissed, his face a purple, sweating mask. Inches from Jonah's tainted flower. She was a bitch just like this Indian whore. He was trying to make Jonah lose control. But Jonah was not losing control. He was losing air. His vision was graying. The sounds of the battle were fading. No, it was a roar. Not from Jonah. Koha. He was there, on the ledge, as if from nowhere. He was a nightmare of blood. His entire stomach was a dark, wet ruin. He had been shot, badly, while shielding a young warrior from a soldier's volley. He was holding himself together with one hand, and in the other, he held his knife. Burke, seeing the new threat, scrambled to his feet, pulling his own knife. Koha looked at Jonah, who was gasping on the rocks. He looked at Burke, who was laughing, ready to kill this half-dead Indian. "You saved my life," Koha gasped, his eyes on Jonah. "It is mine to give." He looked at Burke, and a last, terrible smile spread on his face. "But I will give it to you." He did not attack Burke. He turned, his movements impossibly fast, and threw himself at Burke, not with his knife, but with his body. He was not fighting him. He was holding him. He wrapped his powerful arms around Burke's chest, pinning his arms. In a suicidal bear hug, Burke roared, surprised, and tried to stab him, but Koha just absorbed the blade, his own knife clattering to the rock. "Now!" White man Koha screamed, his eyes locking with Jonah's. "The fuse! Do it, your strength!" The promise now. Jonah understood. Koha was holding Burke directly over the main charge they had set in the rock. Jonah, his throat raw, his body screaming, did not hesitate. He grabbed a burning piece of timber from the grass fire. He scrambled, his hands raw, to the long fuse. "Goodbye." "Koha," he yelled. "Tell my child to speak." Both Koha gasped, his body convulsing as Burke stabbed him again. Jonah touched the flame to the fuse. It sputtered, caught, and began to hiss. A fast-moving snake of fire. "No, you fool," Burke screamed, his eyes wide with terror, finally understanding. He thrashed, but Koha's grip, even in death, was iron. Jonah did not wait. He did not look back. He ran to the edge of the cliff and, without a second thought, he leaped. He fell, a long, terrible drop, into a deep pool of water in the creek bed below. Just as the world exploded, the sound was absolute. It was not a gunshot. It was the sound of the mountain itself tearing apart. The entire ledge, the dynamite, the half-finished railroad track, Koha, and Jeb Burke, all vanished in a single, deafening roar of fire, smoke, and white limestone. A river of rock, tons of it, poured down into the pass, burying the trail, burying Burke's dead, and sealing the canyon completely. The way was shut, below, in the chaos. The young cavalry lieutenant, his horse rearing, his face white with shock, looked at the smoking, impassable wall of rock. He looked at the dead railroad men, their bodies full of arrows. He looked at his own soldiers, who were untouched. He looked at the bodies of Owen and Clyde, at the bottom of a ravine. A clear accident. The story Burke had told of an Apache massacre was a lie. He had been used. He had brought United States soldiers to settle a private land war. He made his decision. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" he yelled. He looked at his sergeant. "It is over." The instigator, Mr. Burke, has been killed in an accidental rock slide, caused by his own reckless use of explosives. The Apache band has scattered. There is no one to fight. We are returning to the fort. He would not file a report of a battle. He would file a report of an accident. He was saving his own career, and in doing so, he was letting them go. Jonah pulled himself from the water, his body a single, throbbing bruise. He lay on the bank, gasping. He saw Leia running toward him, her face a mask of terror. "Jonah! Jonah!" He staggered to his feet. He was alive. They did not speak. They just looked up, at the smoking ruin of the ridge. They found what was left of Koha. He had been thrown by the blast, away from the main slide. He was lying on a flat rock, his eyes open to the sky. He was dead. But his face was not a mask of pain. It looked, Jonah thought, almost peaceful. Leia knelt beside him. She touched his forehead, a gesture of respect. She saw his wound, the one he had taken for the young warrior. She saw his sacrifice, the one he had made for Jonah. She looked at Jonah, her eyes full of a new, terrible understanding. "He told me," Jonah whispered, his throat raw. "He said to tell the child to speak both languages. Do not belong to the hate." Leia began to cry, not for the battle, not for the fire, but for the warrior who had been her enemy and who had, in the end, been her savior. Jonah knelt beside her. He did not touch her. He just was there. Together. They lifted Koha's body. It was heavy, a warrior's weight. They carried him to the edge of the ridge, to a place where he could see the wide, open valley to the south. They sat him up, his back against a rock, his face to the setting sun. A warrior. Acknowledged. Not for the men he had killed, but for the rival he had saved. The high, clear, unforgiving light of Arizona was a memory. The land they found, 6 months later, was a different world. They had ridden south, past the border, past the last of the Army patrols, following the line of a river that was not on any white man's map. It had led them to this, a small, green valley, cupped in the palm of rust-colored mountains. Here, the river ran clean and deep. The soil was dark and fertile. Cottonwoods, thick and old, provided shade. This was not a paradise, not a heaven. There were still dangers, but there were no soldiers. There was no railroad, and there were no Burkes. Here, the small, broken remnant of Leia's people began, slowly, to heal. Jonah was a different man. The gaunt, haunted widower was gone, replaced by someone harder, but more whole. He wore a beard, now, streaked with sun, and the skin of his face and arms was baked to a dark, healthy copper. His limp was still there, a part of him, but he moved with a new, certain purpose. He was building. He was driving posts for a small corral, the rhythmic thud of his hammer a sound of permanence. Across the small meadow, near the riverbank, Leia was watching the children. A half-dozen small, laughing Apache boys and girls were taking turns on a patient pony. Leia, her back straight, her hands on her hips, was supervising. She was no longer a warrior. She was a teacher. She wore a simple cotton dress, not hide, and it could no longer conceal what was obvious. Her belly was high and round, a gentle, promising curve that proclaimed the new life she carried. When one of the children tumbled, unharmed, into the soft sand, she laughed, a sound Jonah had never heard before. It was clear and open and full of peace. That afternoon, as the sun began to soften, Chief Dashi, who had led his people through fire and death, performed a new ceremony. He was older, his face a map of deeper canyons, but his eyes, when he looked at Leia and Jonah, were softer. It was not a wedding. It was a binding. It was a simple, practical thing. Dashi stood before them, with the river at his back and the small, new village as their witness. He held a single eagle feather, bound to a sprig of sage with a leather cord. He said words in his own tongue, words about the strength of the rock and the persistence of the river. Then he looked at Jonah. "You have no words. From your people, Jonah." His hat in his hands. Looked at Leah. "I do not have a book, or a priest. I only have this." He met her eyes, his own steady and clear. "I will stand with you. I will build for you. I will protect what we grow. I will not be the one left standing. I will be the one standing beside you. Always." Dashi nodded, as if this were a good enough prayer. He handed the feather to Leah, and the sage to Jonah. He said no more. The two worlds did not merge. They did not melt. They just stood together, side by side, under the same sky. A month later, a horse trader, a mestizo man who respected no borders, made his way into their valley. He brought salt and steel knives and a single, tattered letter, 3 months old, that he had been paid to carry. The letter was from Red Mesa Crossing. It was from Marshall Reed Calloway. Jonah read it by the light of their new, small fire, his hand, which was no longer shaking, holding the paper. It was not a letter. It was a copy of a report. To the Territorial Office. "I regret to inform you that on the 10th of October, 1882, a violent confrontation, instigated by the late Mr. Jeb Burke, resulted in a catastrophic rock slide at the Saltbone Ridge rail site. Mr. Burke, his brothers Owen and Clyde, and the rancher, Mr. Jonah Calder, were all tragically killed in the blast and resulting slide. Their bodies were not recovered. The hostile Apache band, believed responsible, scattered and is no longer considered a threat." Jonah read it twice. Then, slowly, he fed the paper to the fire. He was dead. Officially, legally, Jonah Calder was buried under a ton of white limestone. Beside his greatest enemy, that legal death was his life. It was their freedom. It was the final, perfect protection for him, for Leah, and for the child in her womb. That evening, the air was cool and sweet, the sky a deep, impossible violet. Jonah and Leah were alone by the new corral. The horses, his and hers, were standing side by side, their heads drooping in the twilight. A soft wind blew, lifting Leah's hair, pressing the simple dress against her full belly. She stood by the fence, her hand resting on the warm, smooth neck of her horse. Then, her hand moved, as if of its own accord, from the horse to her own stomach. A small, involuntary smile touched her lips as she felt the movement within. Jonah came up behind her. He did not startle her. She knew his step. She knew the sound of his breath. He slid his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. It was not the desperate, frantic collision of the hayloft. It was not the exhausted, grateful clinging in the line shack. It was a familiar, easy, and profoundly quiet embrace. His hands, broad and calloused, covered hers, both of them resting on the round, warm tightness of her belly. He pressed his cheek into the hollow of her shoulder, breathing in the scent of her hair, the smell of wood smoke in the clean river air. For a long time, they just stood, two people, breathing as one, watching the first stars appear. "I was thinking," Jonah said, his voice a low rumble against her ear, "that I will teach him to read, and how to track, how to read the land, the way you do." Leah laughed, a soft, low sound. "I will teach her both songs, the songs of my mother, and the fiddle songs you hum when you think no one is listening." "Both," Jonah agreed, his own smile in his voice. They were quiet again. And then Leah's voice turned serious. "We will not tell our child about Burke, not as a story to frighten them. No," Jonah said, his grip tightening. "But we will tell them. We will tell them as a lesson. About greed. About what happens when a man's fear makes him a monster." Leah sighed, a sound of deep, settled contentment. She was home. She turned in his arms, her body heavy, her movements slow and deliberate. She turned to face him, her back now to the horses. The new moon, a thin, silver sliver, was rising over the mountains. The same moon that had been their deadline was now their witness. She took his hand, the one with the white, puckered scar, and she guided it, placing it flat against her stomach, where the child was a living, moving presence between them. She looked up, into his face. His eyes, which had been haunted for so long, were just his. They were clear. They were present. They were hers. Her lips parted, and a soft, gentle smile lit her face, a smile that reached her dark, beautiful eyes. "I want a child from you," Leia said. It was not a demand. It was not a plea. It was not a bargain for survival. It was a confirmation. It was the end of the story, and the beginning of it, all in one. Jonah's response was not a word. He looked at her, at this woman who had seen the cracks in his soul and had not been afraid. This woman who had pulled him from his grave. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones, and he lowered his head and kissed her. It was a slow, deep kiss that held no fear, no desperation, no hiding. His lips were soft and sure. Her lips, which had been set in a line of grim survival for so long, were soft and full, and they answered him with a lazy, warm promise. Their chests pressed together. His heart, once a frantic, panicked bird, was now a slow, deep, steady beat against hers. He did not feel the terror of being left. He did not feel the guilt of the past. He just felt peace. A rare, hard-won, and beautiful peace, here in her arms, in a world that was still full of guns, but was also, now, full of life. He broke the kiss, but he did not let her go. He kept his forehead pressed to hers. Under the light of the new moon, they linked hands and began to walk, his limp and her slow, pregnant gait matching, step for step. They walked toward the small, sturdy cabin they had built together, the one by the river, their two shadows, long and intertwined, stretched out on the dark earth, and between them, moving with them, a third, small shadow, from the dry, unforgiving, and blood-soaked rock. Something soft had finally, impossibly, been allowed to grow, a family, a child born not of hate, not of revenge, but of the brave and terrible decision to love, right between the two lines of fire. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and give us your support by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.